No one knew when Star Wars was released that it would go on to become the global pop culture phenomenon that it did. Now, I've used that kind of line before in other episodes in this series, but it is just as valid a point to make now as it was for my Empire Strikes Back review. Ah, The Empire Strikes Back. Widely regarded as one of the greatest sequels of all time, and, in the opinion of many, an improvement on its awesome predecessor. But it exists only because of the incredible success of that predecessor, a success that was far from assured during the painful process of finding a studio to back the project. Even after production had completed, it was hoped that it would be the moderate success that most science fiction hits were up until that point. If it was, then it would be nice to have a sequel, but only within the limits that the budget would allow. As part of the merchandising for Star Wars, not only would a comic book adaptation of the film be released, check out this link if you haven't seen my review of that, but a novelisation would too. After all, this was the 1970s. The only way you could relive your favourite films once their theatrical run had come to an end was via the printed page. That novelisation states that it was written by George Lucas. It wasn't. It was actually ghost-written by Alan Dean Foster, a man who receives no credit in the book at all, something which apparently didn't bother him. A fully fledged novelist in his own right, penning dozens of science fiction and fantasy works, he is also a novelisation specialist. He has written novelisations of the Alien films, Transformers, Clash of the Titans, Krull, The Black Hole, and by the time he worked on Star Wars, he had already adapted a number of episodes of Star Trek, the animated series, into book form. Numerous other films received his attention that would just be too boring for me to list. Once he had written the Star Wars book, he agreed to write a follow-up, on the understanding that if Star Wars gained enough attention, it would be made into a film. Numerous other films received his attention, but it would just be too boring for me to list them all. Once he had written the Star Wars book, he agreed to write a follow-up, on the understanding that if Star Wars gained enough interest, it would be adapted into a film. That book was Splinter of the Mind's Eye. There were a few constraints on what he was to produce. For a start, making a science fiction film could be expensive, so he should craft a story that was a bit more modest in its scope. There were the props from the first film, they could be reused, that would save money. But in the event, Alan set his story on a planet mostly devoid of technology. Now that would cut costs. Also, that really popular character, the roguish smuggler, the actor hadn't signed on for any sequels yet, so best to leave him out of it. Mark and Carrie, oh yeah, they've signed on, feel free to use them. Quite understandably, Alan began his novel with a dogfight in space between Luke, Leia and some Imperials. Well, that sounded quite expensive, what with all the special effects. So, drop the fighting. And the Imperials. The novel was released in the spring of 1978, and due to the film's popularity, was a hit, remaining on the New York Times top sellers list for 3 months. However, the film was such a success that Alan's pared-down, bargain basement story would not be required for any sequel. George Lucas could be as ambitious as he wanted. I'm not a fan of the book. I have read it, but it was a bit of a struggle and just not very good at all. But that is a subjective opinion, and many people disagree. One such disagreeing voice came from Dark Horse Comics, who in 1996 began their adaptation of it. This was written by Terry Austin, a well-known name in comics, but not for writing. He was a prolific inker, and received no fewer than 3 Eagle Awards for favourite inker whilst working with John Byrne on the X-Men. He did do a bit of writing for that title, but still inking was his main trade, and he had several iconic runs on various titles. Actually, he inked this series too, over the pencils of Chris Sprouse, another award winner for his work on Alan Moore's Tom Strong. Okay, I can't put it off anymore. Let's have a look at the thing. Forget The Empire Strikes Back. Forget The Return of the Jedi. In this alternate reality, those 2 films never happened, and they never will either. Instead, we have this, which is set sometime after the end of episode 4. And it starts out alright. Well, when I say starts out, I mean the immediate beginning. Because from the off, we get to see more of the Y-Wing fighter, a ship that was in the original film, but there wasn't any real focus on it. This particular Y-Wing is being piloted by Princess Leia, but she's having technical difficulties. She's on her way to an Alliance conference on the planet Sirkarpus 4, but because of these issues now with the ship, she's going to be forced to land on Sirkarpus 5 for some emergency repairs. Luke is there, he's following close behind in his X-Wing. As they approach the planet, however, he feels a strong surge of force power. Just as he's recovering from that, the atmosphere crackles with a sudden and massive electrical storm. This means that Luke's ship is now in trouble, and he quickly finds himself having to crash land on the planet below. He and R2 survive this pretty much unscathed, although they've now been separated from Leia and C-3PO, so they soon set out to find them. How do they know where to look for them? Well, it's explained here. Luke says if their original plotting tape was accurate, and Leia didn't alter her course of descent, the Trey Comp ought to lead them to them, eventually. As you've seen by now, this is a very lush planet, mostly jungle, but with a bit of swamp thrown in. Now, we were never going to get to see Dagobah, were we? So this would have been an interesting alternative location, different to the deserts of Tatooine and the Death Star that we saw in the first film. Whilst Luke and R2 are making their way through that jungle, they suddenly come across a fearsome beast. Meanwhile, at their own landing site, we catch up with Leia and 3PO. He is arguably even more jumpy than usual, and when they hear one particular jungle noise, he says that it's a hunger-crazed Endorian Yayax. At the very least, he urges her to shoot before it attacks them. She does, but it turns out it isn't an Endorian Yayax at all. Instead, it's Luke. Now I know what you're thinking. What happened to that mysterious, ferocious creature? Well, it actually takes Luke another 4 panels to even mention it. And when he does, he says that as soon as it saw him and R2, it ran off. Bit of a fake out, isn't it? From this point, the 4 of them head towards a homing beacon, which Leia had discovered shortly before her ship landed. But no sooner do they set out than Leia begins sinking into one of the jungle's swamps. But don't worry, Luke just quickly pulls her out. Okay. Night falls and they set up camp with the droids acting as lookouts. That allows Luke and Leia to get cozy. It's a bit awkward. Right, the next day they continue their journey. Now you see, in the films we would always be cutting between our heroes and the Empire. That helped keep things tripping along nicely. In the first film, of course, there was the attack on the Tonti 4 and the fallout from that. In The Empire Strikes Back, there was plenty of cutting to and fro as the Empire was searching for the young Skywalker. And even in The Return of the Jedi, we cut from Tatooine and what was going on there to the new Death Star and the expected arrival of the Emperor. Here, this just reads like someone's diary. There's a boring conversation about what the beacon might be leading them to before they actually reach the source of it, which turns out to be some kind of outpost. Now, credit where it's due here. Due to the more modern colouring techniques, the colours here are fantastic. You look at the variety of shades there, of earthy tones. There's no way that could have been achieved 10 or more years prior to this. And it helps convey the feeling of a grubby, working location. There are inhabitants to this community, stormtroopers, along with some miners. This leads Leia to believe that the Empire are there mining something that they want to keep secret. In fact, she thinks that they are carrying out illegal energy mining, and that was the source of that electrical storm that happened earlier on. C-3PO points out that if they want to fit in, they're going to have to change their clothes. So the pair of them decide to break into a nearby store. To do this, Luke uses his lightsaber by... Oh, can they do that? The various creators in the Star Wars universe all like to try their hand at their own cantina scene, don't they? And we have one here. As Having changed into the kind of clothing that the miners wear, Luke and Leia enter a nearby bar. Luke is angered when he sees one of the miners mistreating one of the natives of the planet, but Leia tells him to sit down and not draw attention to them. That's odd. I don't know, it just looks like something else should be going on in this picture, but it isn't. I don't know, maybe there's a speech bubble missing, maybe coming from Leia. It just doesn't seem right. At that point, they notice that some Imperial officers are eyeing them suspiciously. So, to allay their fears, Luke decides to slap Leia. Fair play to him, it works, because when one of the Imperial officers asks if there's trouble, he explains that Leia is his servant and just needs to be put in her place. The officer buys it, but shortly after he leaves, they've got somebody else sitting at their table. Someone, I don't know. See what you think. Her name is Hala. She's a little bit feisty and a little bit grouchy. I think she's supposed to be likeable, but it doesn't really work for me. She's Force sensitive, and she says that the Force told her that they were strangers to this planet. She proves her claims by using the Force, and she uses it to move a salt cellar. To which Luke says, very impressive. I like to think that that's sarcasm, but there's no way of knowing for sure. She wants their help, and if they do help her, she will help them steal a ship and get off the planet. If they don't help her, then she will rat them out to Grammel, the guy that's in charge of this base. Okay, and she's one of the good guys, right? As for what she wants them to do, she wants them to help her get the Kyber crystal from a hidden temple. Some people think it doesn't even exist, but she has proof. Proof in the form of a shard of the crystal, or I suppose a splinter. When Luke touches it, it instantly increases his perception of the Force, magnifies it, clarifies it. He thinks that whoever possesses the whole crystal could do just about anything. Before she saw proof of the crystal's existence, Leia said, "This all sounds so nebulous." What the hell is that supposed to mean? Anyway, Luke agrees to help Hala, saying that if they don't get the crystal, then it's possible that the Empire would get it, and nobody wants that. Then they leave the bar, and we see one of the most infamous scenes from this whole story, which is Luke and Leia's play fight in the mud. I suppose it serves a purpose, because it draws the attention of some local miners who think that the servant Leia is being disrespectful to her master, but even so, it's just so soft. As Hala goes off to find the droids, we are left actually with some action. Well, almost. Because just as the leader of the group is attacking Luke, the issue comes to an end. So we never did really get any action in issue 1. At least we know that that fight is going to continue in issue 2. Which it does, and Luke even gets his lightsaber out. And we have our obligatory severed limb, before the fight is broken up by the local law enforcement. They take everybody involved to go and see Captain Supervisor Grammel. Whilst there, he is about to insist on identification from our heroes when he is called away. Neither Luke, Leia, nor we can hear what he's being told, but Luke doesn't like it. He says, "I don't like this, Leia." That's not what you're supposed to say. Captain Supervisor Grammel returns to them and says it's clear that the other group of miners are the ones who started the fight. The leader of that group isn't happy. He says he'll file a grievance with the Imperial Department of Resources. Grammel says, "Okay, well, you'll need this recorded transcript of what's happened then, won't you?" If you say so. Actually, I don't know where that recorded transcript came from, and I'm not entirely sure what happens to it. It's not particularly clear from the illustrations, but I'm guessing he stuck it in the miner's eye and then pulled it out again, because look, I guess that's him cleaning it in the background. So does the miner need it for his complaint or not? Then Grammel gets rough with our heroes, kicking Leia to the ground. So Luke says, "Stop it, I'll tell you everything you want to know. We're escaped criminals from Sircarpus with a death sentence on our heads. We're wanted for extortion and blackmail and various other lies on top of that, all of which Grammel sees through, particularly as he says that they were seen talking to a woman in that bar and they were seen to be in possession of a particularly interesting gemstone. Luke hands it over to Grammel before he and Leia are sent to a holding cell whilst their identities are being confirmed. One of the guards says to them that there are already 2 dangerous inmates in that cell. Leia says, "I don't think I like this one bit." Now she's doing it. Repeat after me. I have a bad... Grammel then contacts Governor Bin Asada to ask him if he knows anything about the gem. But while he's talking to him, Bin Asada is pretty sure that he recognises one of the prisoners. That then prompts him to send out his own communication to his boss. You can almost hear the Imperial March, can't you? It turns out that Leia had no reason to worry because those dangerous inmates that they have been locked up with were only dangerous to stormtroopers because they hate the Empire. Their names are Hin and Ki, although you can call them Chewbacca 2 and Chewbacca 3. Before long, Hala arrives at the window. She's there to rescue them, and she tries to use the Force to lift up a food tray and swipe it past the door release control. Her control over the Force isn't good enough though. So, with a bit of inspiration from Obi-Wan Kenobi's spirit, Luke tries his hand and succeeds. Then we get more action. Fleeing from their cell, it isn't long before our heroes encounter a group of stormtrooper guards, which Chewbacca's 2 and 3 enjoy dealing with. One of the Chewbaccas has also managed to find Luke's lightsaber, some guns, and a whole stack of explosives. It has to be said that some of the dialogue in this series is very Lucas-esque. For example, after Luke blows a hole in the outside wall, Leia points out that reinforcement stormtroopers have arrived, and he says, "You go ahead, I'm going to do what I can to discourage pursuit." It's not the worst line in the world, but it is pretty clunky, and it doesn't sound particularly natural. Anyway, his plan works, as the explosives he launches in the direction of the stormtroopers and Grammel certainly do discourage them. Back in the outside world, they quickly meet up with the droids and the old woman. She has found a vehicle that she refers to as a crawler, and with her behind the wheel, they soon break out of the compound. And once beyond the perimeter fence, they plunge deep into the jungle, making a beeline for the temple and the Kyber crystal. Do you know, they really could do with putting some meanwhiles on these pages sometimes. For example, here we transition from them at the bottom of one page, being in the jungle, to the next page with Grammel sitting in a chair in a medical bay. I keep thinking I've missed something. He's being treated for the burns that he sustained in the explosion. He's very grateful to the work that the doctor has done, and she says, well, show that gratitude by not executing the troopers who let the prisoners get away. He says they're incompetent at best, but I will need every ambulatory body for the search ahead. Again, clunky, but ambulatory body? Do they think that sounds intelligent? We may not have meanwhiles on here, but the next time we meet up with our heroes, we do have a box that says 7 days later. But yes, they are still on their way to the temple, which Hala says is between 7 to 10 days drive from the base. Being in the swampy part of the jungle, their vehicle begins to sink. So they quickly head for what looks like firm land. Well, it is firm, but it isn't land. 3PO urges her to turn around, and Hala says, "What do you think I'm doing, dim bulb?" Luke notices that the creature doesn't seem to feel anything, so he says, "Aim for the eyes." But it's all too late, as it seems our heroes are doomed. Now, it won't surprise you to hear that our heroes do survive that fall, but first of all, we've got a brief diversion at the beginning of issue 3, which begins with an awesome illustration of Darth Vader. He is demanding an update from Captain Piet, a status report. How long will it be until they reach Sirkarpos 4? He wants revenge and the Kyber crystal as soon as possible. And Captain Piet tells him that the Super Star Destroyer, the Executor, or is it Executor? I was never really sure, to be honest, is at peak efficiency and will be there in little over a day. This is fascinating. Captain Piet, the Super Star Destroyer. So there were some concepts that made it through, that survived to The Empire Strikes Back. Excuse me? Not according to this. Neither of them are in this. And I will never forgive you for making me look at it again. Oh, okay. Well, I guess they added that so it would tie in more to the original trilogy continuity, rather than being this alternate reality. Okay. Back on Mimban, Luke and Leia are running from the beast. But it is not just very large, but also very fast. They come across a structure, and Leia says, "What's that?" To which Luke says, "It looks like a ceremonial cistern." Of course it does. There is actually a ladder that is hung over the side of this structure, and the pair of them descend the ladder in the hopes that they will evade the pursuing monster. About halfway down, they find a ledge, just as the creature spots them. But the creature's massive size is its undoing. As it reaches down into the well, it overextends itself and plummets past them. As it fell, it took that ladder with them, so they are now trapped on that ledge. Hala and the others appear at the rim of the shaft, and she says that it was built by some of the natives, and that if they follow that ledge round, they should find an exit. It turns out Hala is correct, and for the next few pages we follow Luke and Leia as they explore this new subterranean world that will hopefully take them back to the surface. At one point they find an underground lake, the water of which Leia says is as black as the Emperor's mind. It would have been a lot funnier if she'd said boxer shorts. Luke pulls up a giant water lily leaf, and they use that as a kind of caracol to get them to the other side of the lake. Outside, their colleagues are settling down to camp for the night, and Hala is charmingly glib about what Luke and Leia may be going through. She also points out what she thinks is a shooting star, but it's actually the best looking of all Imperial ships. That Imperial shuttle is making its way to the kind of landing pad we saw in The Return of the Jedi. And of course, it carries on it Darth Vader, who is now commandeering all of Grammel's troops in an attempt to recapture Leia and Luke. Then the stakes continue to be raised all around. As Luke and Leia find themselves having to deal with some kind of lake-dwelling blob monster, and their colleagues, having found the other end of the subterranean network, are captured by the inhabitants, with 3PO shouting out, "Oh dear, miscreants abound." So anyway, they are caught. Luke and Leia have discovered an underground city, and as they approach it, they are jumped upon by half a dozen unfriendly natives, one of whom is quite neatly sliced in half. We actually get a good fight here, with Leia armed with, I think, a stalactite, and of course Luke with his lightsaber. We get the obligatory severed limbs, as well as Luke hurling his lightsaber to land in the back of one of Leia's attackers. Not to be outdone, Leia picks up one of the natives' axes and hurls that at one of their number, although it only injures him rather than kills him. "Hey, I nearly killed that guy! Ha 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 ha." Although they've won that battle, they quickly discover that there are hundreds more of those aliens. Leia, quite boldly, wants to go and get acquainted with them. It seems that her irrational confidence wasn't misplaced, as they all seem to be alright with them. Partly it's because Hala and the others are already there, and partly it's because the chief now wants Luke to fight their champion. If he refuses, then they will all be killed. Hala tells Luke the native's word for quit, although she says if he does shout that out during the fight, then they will probably all be killed anyway. Then, as he wanders off, she tells Leia that actually the word she told him doesn't mean quit at all. It's just one of the natives' swear words. Well, that's helpful. And the issue ends with a practically wordless fight between Luke and the champion, with Luke's head ending up being dunked below the water. And so to the last issue, thank God. The cover to this one is a real tease, because it shows what is, in this continuity, the first time that Vader and Luke have fought. Speaking of fighting, Luke's head is still underwater, Leia is understandably worried, and Hala doesn't give a toss. The duel comes to an end though, when Luke uses the Force to lift a rock out of the water and knock out his opponent. Due to that victory, Luke and his companions are treated as honoured guests, but it's during the feast held in their honour that Luke senses the presence of Vader. Also, a scout arrives bearing news of humans coming, many stormtroopers with guns. The natives say that they will help fight the stormtroopers, but Luke is sceptical, saying, "Perfect, stone axes against power rifles. We're doomed." Yeah, what chance would a primitive race using archaic weapons have against the might of the Empire? Some of the natives overpower some Imperial scouts and steal their weapons. Not that we're shown that. Leia says all she wants is one clear shot at Vader. Then it's time for some action again, as the stormtroopers are indeed overwhelmed, with the whole cast, including the two Chewbaccas, getting involved, and Luke using some good lightsaber skills. In fact, if this had been included in a film, it would have represented, strangely, the first time we saw a lightsaber being used against stormtroopers. Darth Vader is there, and seeing the debacle before him, he orders all troops back to the surface. As he turns to leave, this gives Leia the opportunity to shoot him. And she does. Not that it has much effect, and Leia responds with a, "Well, darn." That's actually a pretty good reaction. So they've won. But hold on, because Luke senses something. He senses that Vader is not retreating to his ship or even to the miner's town. He is on his way to the temple that holds the Kyber crystal, and he cannot be allowed to have it. A short time later, the two Chewbaccas manage to source an Imperial vehicle, and our heroes, commandeering it, set off in the direction of the temple. We see that Vader is indeed on his way to the temple as well, in a good-looking vehicle that really holds to the Imperial design aesthetic. I'm sure Hasbro are planning on releasing that as we speak. We then get arguably the best death ever in Star Wars, as, sick of Gramwell's excuses, Vader cuts him in half, vertically. We know, don't we, that a lot of the distances on this planet are pretty vast, so it is a few days later that our heroes finally find the temple. The temple has long since been abandoned, but within it they find the statue of a rather Lovecraftian deity, and embedded in its chest, the Kyber crystal. They barely have time to appreciate the crystal's beauty when a giant lizard appears to destroy the moment. Luke manages to defeat it by bringing part of the temple down on it, but in so doing, he himself is trapped under some of the masonry. Not only that, but the two Chewbaccas are dead. They weren't killed by the collapsing temple, they were killed by Vader. He also got the droids to turn themselves off, I guess by using the Force. He then explains that his spies have told him that it was Luke who destroyed the Death Star. But before he has time to exact his revenge, Leia picks up Luke's lightsaber and attacks him. Not only that, but she actually manages to injure him. Hala has got her hands on the crystal, and the tide of battle has now turned enough that Vader is really toying with Leia, striking her again and again. I have to admit, at the moment, this is pretty good. Also, I've got some good news. Chewbacca 1, or is it Chewbacca 2, still has enough life in them to free Luke. And it's not a moment too soon, as Leia takes another hit. Now, freed from the rock, Luke calls to her. She tosses his lightsaber to him, and the duel we've all been waiting for begins. And again, it's pretty good. There is some lightsaber dueling, a bit of Force powers being used, although I do keep waiting for Vader to come out with some kind of revelation. Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. That kind of thing. At one point, Vader uses, I think, force lightning to try to finish him off, and is impressed when Luke is actually able to repel that back at him. Then Luke manages to completely cut off Vader's right arm. That's pretty impressive. Now, remember, we've seen what is arguably the best death in Star Wars? Well, brace yourselves for what is undoubtedly the worst. Because as Vader advances on an exhausted Luke, he trips and falls down a crevasse. He trips. A Dark Lord of the Sith trips and falls to his seeming death. But that's not the worst aspect of it. Because what is it that he tripped over? It was his own detached arm. How humiliating. It seems that Leia is dying from her injuries. And Luke says, "Goodbye, Leia. I loved you." Like a sister. However, he needn't have worried, because it seems the Kyber crystal has the power to heal. First of all, he is revitalized, and then Leia is brought back from the brink of death with nothing more than a bad headache. Leia says, "What about Vader?" And Luke says he's gone for now. Okay, so I guess he isn't dead. At least that means it wasn't the worst death ever, just the worst exit ever. Then the last few loose ends are tied up. The two Chewbaccas are going to get a decent burial. Hala holds good to her promise and says she will find a ship for them. And they even say that they're going to take Hala with them. They know a guy, a smuggler and a pirate, who once thought much like her, and they'll probably get along well. And even the droids are reactivated, with 3PO saying, "Have I missed anything? Oh, Master Luke, why is everybody laughing at me?" It's because you're an idiot. And we have now, thankfully, reached the end. Oh, actually, on the back there's an advert for the comic book adaptation of Shadows of the Empire. Nah. Is it over yet? Well, there you have it. Make your own minds up. I certainly have. So what was the story's legacy? Well, it didn't derail Dark Horse's plans, as they continued to publish a long list of Star Wars titles up until Marvel reacquired the rights in 2015. As part of the original deal, Alan Dean Foster had agreed to write a third book, a sequel to this story. But due to the film's massive success, this just wasn't required. He didn't lose touch with the franchise though, and was back in the writer's chair for the novelisation of The Force Awakens. As for the films, they went from strength to strength. Star Wars got the sequel it deserved in The Empire Strikes Back, and the trilogy was rounded out by the not quite as good, but still beloved Return of the Jedi.